in my first academic position, we had a grant from the U.S. State Department there, this Virginia Tech University. We had a grant from the State Department that was intended to develop a model for working with malnourished children, feeding malnourished children. There again, the thought was, these children were malnourished primarily because they weren't getting enough protein. So I'm schooled in this idea that the more protein, the better. However, I saw something in the children that didn't exactly square with that presumption, that bias, I should say. Namely, I was told by my medical colleagues one day in the Philippines when we were there that they were operating on some children 4 years of age and younger for liver cancer. Well, that was really odd. I went back and looked at some of the nutritional data we had, got the impression that the children likely to get the liver cancer were the ones consuming were the ones from the families consuming the most protein. Really odd. More protein, more cancer, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. But in any case, this study then came out from India, now 54 years ago. So they did a little study with animals and they got these results. Animals given the higher levels of protein, 20% of total calories, compared to animals given the lower levels, 5%. Both groups were initiated with a carcinogen, so as we say. In any case, the animals given higher levels of protein, they were the ones who got the cancer. The ones given lower levels did not. Exactly the opposite of what they thought. This coincided with some of the impressions that I was getting with the children. So it led to this really striking notion. Increase in protein, increase in cancer, sound crazy. So I came back home to my laboratory at Virginia Tech and got some money from the NIH, a grant that continued for the next 27 years, I should say. Well, we had a chance to really ask that question. Is it possible that animal protein could increase cancer? And I could just show you a ton of studies, but I'm going to just focus on one because it really convinced me that there's something here. I mean, I was inclined to really doubt this, but we did this study, and I want to show you what we did. This is the growth of, in animals, experimental rats, this is the growth of cancer over the first 12 weeks. Animals fed 20% protein, like the Indian workers did, and you can see it's going rather well. Animals given 5% did not. But then we did something more that was really striking. I wanted to see what would happen if we switched the diets during that 12-week period. 20%, 5%, back to 20, back to 5, and vice versa. This is just one representation of that. And what we saw was striking. We could control cancer development simply by adjusting this nutrient intake, suggesting that nutrition might be important in controlling whether or not cancer works or not. It was really quite dramatic. We did this kind of study in many different ways, and I can tell you, it's there, it's true. And soy protein does not increase cancer development, even when fed at the 20% level. It also seemed to apply to other animal proteins in general. So with that in mind, still not totally convinced that this animal protein effect was real. I wanted to know what the mechanism was. So we set about looking for mechanisms. These studies went on over a period at least, 10, 12 years or so. And I kept looking for the mechanism that might account for this. And in making those kind of studies, we tended to, in experimental cancer research, we tended to think of cancer as being composed of 3 stages. The first stage is initiation. That's when the cancer is forming from a mutation of mutated genes. Secondly, we talk about a stage that takes a much longer period of time called promotion. That's when the new cancer cells, once formed, then are dividing and growing into tumors, if you will. And then the third stage is when the cancer is breaking away from this tissue of origin and going someplace else. We call it metastasis, and that is called progression. So with that in mind, I wanted to see, what is the mechanism? So we started out early in the simplest level, looking for a mechanism in the first stage. We found a number of mechanisms that seemed to be involved in initiating the cancer. The high protein diet could increase the rate of entry of the carcinogens into the cell. Oh, that's pretty important. When carcinogens get inside of cells, they are metabolized by a mixed function oxidase enzyme system, MFO. And what we found there was that, and by the way, it's metabolized to produce a product that's very reactive that then binds to the DNA of genes. That's where the mutations occur. What we found was that the high animal protein consumption increased the amount of enzyme being synthesized, rearranged the structure so it became more active, and then in turn it increased the binding of the product, that really reactive product of the mutation. It increased the product to the DNA, which was the beginning of the mutation. But then we have incidentally, a repair mechanism that keeps that under control, if you will. It's working all the time in our bodies. It's called DNA repair. What we found there was that high protein diet actually turned it off. I mean, the thing that's protecting us, the high protein diet turned it off. So there was a bunch of mechanisms in that first stage. I'm getting a little bit frustrated. Maybe I'm not sure what we're looking at here by this time. So we turned our attention to the second stage. Now, the second stage, you'll notice I put arrows, reversible arrows here as a result of the research that we were doing, turning cancer involved. And so in the second stage, we started looking for mechanisms. Again, we found a bunch of mechanisms. One here in yellow, that was a good one. That's called natural killer cell activity. This was done, by the way, about 25, 30 years ago. Natural killer cells now are the topic of discussion these days for trying to figure out a drug that enhance their activity. But in any case, we found that the high protein diet decreased natural killer cells, the good stuff. And it increased the rate at which cells divide. It increased the ability of the protein, it increased the ability of the protein to form very reactive compounds called oxygen radicals. Reactive oxygen species, sometimes we say. It also did some other things. It increased the production of hormone and altered calories. So here we had all these mechanisms just kept popping up every time that, and I say this was going over a period of at least 10, 12, even longer, I guess, for doing this kind of research. So in summary, we found that 8 of these mechanisms increased cancer, and 2 of them that were good, and they were turned off. So we got 10 mechanisms. Wow. All 10 worked in unison to increase cancer. That was the thought that I found really quite remarkable. It's not about one mechanism. All of a sudden, I started losing my interest in the idea that there was one mechanism that might lend itself to, let's say, pharmacologic treatment. Instead, this nutrition was just, everything was just going wrong at the same time. We worked on 10. I could probably put another couple here that we had information on. I'm sure now there's far more than that. But the point is, the high protein diet just changed all these mechanisms almost simultaneously to do the same thing. And you understand? So as far as drug intervention is concerned, forget it. That's not the way to solve the problem. Actually, I can tell you a little story to put the cap on this. She was, before we had completely changed, she was diagnosed with advanced melanoma. That's the most serious kind of cancer. So it was a bit of a shock because we thought we had done enough, and there it is. And she's at that time in her late 40s, and I'm in my early 50s. And so we went to the doctor and so forth and so on, an oncologist, and he sold us the hook, line, and sinker, tried to sell her on the idea what everybody's told to say. Like, here we're going to have you do that. It had advanced to her lymph glands. The cancer advanced there, so it's metastatic. That's a very serious stage. And so at that point, she goes in for the visit, the final visit, where she's going to have an operation to take out the lymph, that lymph tissue, number one. Number two, be treated by all the chemotherapy. And she looked at it and she said, I'm not doing any of it. Well, so that's when we got really strict at the end of the day and tried to really do it right. And nothing ever happened.